everyone. This is our African Cup of Nations preview show. We have a star-studded panel here today to go through all 6 groups, the 24 teams that will be in the Ivory Coast for the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations. Before we get into the previews, let's go around and introduce ourselves because we've brought a number of different shows together and experts on Africa and the Africa Cup of Nations. So to start, I'm your host, Brandon Riff. I, along with Joe Gould, who will introduce himself shortly, run the International Window podcast. We focus on international football exclusively. You can find us on X or Twitter at Window INTL Pod. Joe, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Joe. I also co-host the show with Brandon, and yeah, we're excited to have everybody on. You can also we should shout out Brandon. You can find him at _global as well.
Thank you.
And I do a little bit of freelance design work on the side as well. So all the stuff that you're seeing come out from our podcast account in terms of graphics, that would be myself. So excited to talk about Africa.
As am I. And let's jump to you because I hear you've got a phenomenal show yourself.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And really, thanks for having us on, first of all. Yeah, and Rahman and myself are representing here Made in Africa, the podcast. I work for The Guardian. I've worked there for almost a decade now, but always had a love for African football and wrote a book about Premier League players from Africa of the name Made in Africa. And we've expanded it into a podcast, and we cover, African players in the Premier League and beyond, really. And we always try and take a look at different subjects. And yeah, it's really good to get together with you and to have our other special guest today, Maher Mezahi, as I always struggle with his name. I got there in the end. Sorry, and a regular guest and one of our first ever guests actually on our podcast. So I'm sure Rahman will join me in welcoming him to the podcast.
Awesome. And Rahman, and where can we find, Ed, where can we find your podcast so our listeners can also check that out as well?
Yeah, so it's on on Made in Africa. You can find it on Spotify and on most podcast providers. Yeah, check it out. It's on Made in Africa. Type that into any, especially on Spotify. That's the best place to get it. All
right. And Maher, let me jump over to you and you can introduce yourself because I know you need no introduction.
I don't know about that, but yeah, my name is Maher Mezahi. I'm an Algerian American journalist, Canadian too. I cover African football with a specialty really in North Africa. Most of my work is freelance. I've had the pleasure of working with guys like Ed at The Guardian, some Al Jazeera English work. A lot of my work is with the BBC as well. And I'm really looking forward to going to my 4th Africa Cup of Nations. The AFCON is really sort of a passion of mine. It's really what I live for professionally speaking. And so this is probably the most wonderful time of the year for me. And very recently too, if you'll allow me, I also started a podcast. I took a page out of Ed and Rahman's book, and we have something called the African Five-a-Side podcast, which at most times will mostly cover really the cross-section between history, sociology, politics on the African continent, and football. But in the lead up to the AFCON, we've been doing previews of all 24 teams. So I highly recommend you guys check that out if you have the time.
I have the time. I've checked it out. It's pretty good. So I love it. Good stuff. Yeah, we should also, Rahman, you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, my name is Rahman Osman. I work for LondonWorld as the London football correspondent. So it's basically a London website, but I'm in charge of the football as in parties and just 2 clubs I cover mostly. Chelsea and Tottenham, so literally everything about them when a pen drops. And originally Ghanaian British, and following football, but of course being Ghanaian automatically makes me African and got an incredible passion for African game. And if you make a living writing about Chelsea and Tottenham, you might as well be proud enough to create a path so you can cast more light on African players and have a platform that discusses African players. So Ed and I have decided that even if our employers like it or not, we'll always find a way to get guests and project the African game. Made in Africa it's incredibly, good. It's open opportunities for me also, especially on the radio front. I've been able to go to platforms like Talk Sports, sometimes Five Live, just to talk about African players. And even though I make money through writing about Chelsea and Tottenham, I get more fulfillment speaking about the continent and trying to cast more light and talk about players that normally wouldn't make the editorials in the company I work for.
Awesome. Well, we are super excited to have all of you, and let's get into the tournament itself. So we're just about a week away, exactly a week away today as we record from the opening match, which is going to be in Group A between the Ivory Coast and Guinea-Bissau. Joining those two in Group A are Nigeria and Equatorial Guinea, and let's jump into that group. I think this is going to be a very, very interesting group, especially given where Nigeria is. I think they're a bit of a wild card in this group for Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea to see what opportunities they have to progress and actually get out of the group. So before we get into the host in that opening match, let's talk about Nigeria a little bit. Joe, we've talked about Nigeria and perhaps some of their shortfalls recently. What do you think of the Nigeria squad and who they're bringing to the Ivory Coast?
Well, they're always a power, right? So very talented squad. To me, it feels a little unbalanced, and I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees. I'll be very interested to hear what they had to say. I think there's a lot of stars, but I'm not sure that there's like the glue to bring the title home, I guess, so to speak. It doesn't look like Wilfred Ndidi's going to be there. He's out injured. As of this morning, at least from what I've seen, there's no Iheanacho. So Kelechi's he hasn't reported to the camp yet, so that could be a potential big loss for them. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with Nigeria.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they've got the quality within the squad to win it. There's no doubt about that. I mean, Osimhen is African Player of the Year just voted, and the coach is a bit of an issue, I think, isn't it? I mean, they always struggle for especially since they won it last time, really, and it's been such a long time now, almost 10 years now, isn't it, since Nigeria won it, and the coach is still kind of the jury's still out on him, Jose Peseiro, and he mentioned the other day just how much they are kind of relying on Osimhen for his goals, but with him there, anything can happen with them. I think they've got the quality, especially up front, to really come alight at the tournament. But I think there's question marks about them at the back. Not really any. There's a few decent players. Bassey's having a reasonable season now, isn't he, for Fulham, having struggled to get in the team first of all. But yeah, I think that's their big Achilles heel, really. But obviously up front, as well as Osimhen, you have Chukwueze, plenty of other forward options, and even if Iheanacho doesn't make it, he's really, really strong up front. Boniface is obviously having an amazing season, so goals shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah,
That was the case in qualifying too. They scored 22 goals in qualifying in only 6 matches. They did a better job at the back, only conceding 4. But overall, when you look at the standings, they were in the same group. This is actually Nigeria and Guinea-Bissau are the only 2 teams that were paired together in qualifying that are also paired together at the final. Nigeria only finished 2 points ahead of Guinea-Bissau in qualifying.
Yeah, and they lost.
How many of those goals were scored? Sorry, Ed.
So I was just going to say they lost. I think they lost to them at home. They beat each other away, basically, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the qualifying, which was a bit of a surprise, but yeah, I mean, it just shows you. I think that just sums up Nigeria's fragility, doesn't it? Really, one day they could be world beaters, and like in the last tournament, just one bad performance and you're out.
Yeah.
Sorry, Maher.
No, I was just going to ask how many of those goals were scored against Sao Tome and Principe, who are obviously the minnows in that qualifying group. I know they beat them 10-0, I think, one day or something, or 10-1 or something, right?
They defeated them 10-0, and they defeated them 6-0.
Yeah, so I think
you take that away.
Those numbers are a bit inflated, yeah.
That they are. In the other 4 matches, they only scored 6 goals and conceded 4.
And if you look at the previous international window in FIFA World Cup qualifying, they played against Lesotho and they played against Zimbabwe, and I think they were held to a draw in both of those matches. Those are matches that Nigeria, as the Super Eagles, are expected to win, And so I 100% agree with what everybody's saying about, the quality in attack. It's probably the best front line in Africa. There is some quality in defense as well, as Ed was saying. Now the question is, can Jose Peseiro manage to build a formation and a system in which things are a little more coherent, cohesive? They've been playing a 4-4-2, which usually on the pitch looks more like a 4-2-4, and it often looks like their team is split into 2 horizontally between the front line and the back line. And what they really need is that that midfield link that they don't seem to find. Sometimes they try a little too hard to try and manufacture it. They'll play at somebody like Alex Iwobi, who we've known more as an attacking midfielder or a creative midfielder. They'll put him as a deep lying central midfielder, and that doesn't really tend to work. So those are really the main question marks that we have about Nigeria. And just for everybody that's listening, apologies if you hear some drilling. My neighbor decided to I think he's installing a water reservoir. North Africa is a very water stressed area of the world, so I think he's installing a water reservoir. It's going to probably take another few more hours. Apologies.
I've just got to say, yeah, I just really want to add that. I mean, Nigeria's problems are quite highlighted, but they come into the competition without a defeat in their last 7 games. And yeah, you can talk about the draws they've had, but to go into a competition having not lost in your last 7 says something about your mental strength. And I mean, the AFCON is probably the only competition in the world where the difference between the top teams and the very low teams it's very minimal. I mean, everybody can beat everybody. It's that kind of competition. And Victor Osimhen, there's no player who has a point to prove than Osimhen coming into this competition. He's the African best player, and I don't really buy into Nigeria's defenses that poor. I mean, William Trasekon is playing very well in the Conference League with PAOK, and they literally went through the Conference League group without a defeat. He was playing quite well. He's been invited. Ola Aina, Forest is quite really good. I mean, Bassi is becoming very important for Fulham now. So if they get the act together, they've literally got a collection of really good individuals. But the Super Eagles, it's a troubled country. It's a troubled team. The problems or the reasons why they don't perform it's not because it's not entirely a coaching thing. Nigeria is the biggest country in Africa, and I can tell you almost 200 million people from Nigeria are coaches. If you've ever been to, everybody has who should play and why the person should play and why the person deserves to play than the other. And these things eventually, and if you've been to a competition like the AFCON, the Nigerian team is surrounded by the Nigerian fans, and you'd literally think that the Nigerian journalists are Nigerian fans. They indirectly influence, why did you pass it that way? Why didn't you do it that way? And those how they handle it. I think the biggest problem or the biggest challenge for them is to create a seed mentality where they can thrive. When they last won it in 2013, the Sunday in Bar group, that year, there was that feeling that they played with a certain level of head. And ironically, it was a local player, somebody who was playing in the Nigerian league, that got the win. And then fair play to players like Victor Moses and even John Obi Mikel would come up and prove the point that they can help Nigeria win the AFCON. So I will struggle to find a country with individual players that are as good as the Super Eagles. And like all of you rightfully said, the biggest puzzle to solve is shutting out the noise and getting them to play as a unit.
I think you mentioned something that I found very true, and well, everything that you said was true.
Mm-hmm.
And but the closeness between the top and the bottom in Africa. And I think this group is a great example of that, because you look at the other two teams that perhaps you'd expect are going to finish third and fourth in both Equatorial Guinea and Guinea-Bissau. I don't think Nigeria is excited to play either of those teams. And particularly coming out of a group where they only finished 2 points ahead of Guinea-Bissau. Does anyone think either of those teams can overtake Nigeria? And the one that continually sticks out to me, if you've listened to our podcast, I've told Joe about my love for Equatorial Guinea on numerous occasions. And they're always a team for me that has stuck out. They seem to be in, I would say, maybe the top 12 to 15 of Africa. Is this perhaps the tournament and finally getting away from Tunisia in terms of qualification and in World Cup qualification? They're not staring at Tunisia. Is this the opportunity for Equatorial Guinea or even for Guinea-Bissau to maybe overtake Nigeria?
I think it's going to be tough for them to come top of the group, but I don't know. I mean, what makes it difficult is Ivory Coast are obviously at home, and I mean that comes with its own pressures, though, doesn't it? And and we're going to talk about the Ivory Coast in a minute, but yeah, I think there's every chance they could, because I think there's 9 matches unbeaten coming into this tournament. It's a very experienced squad that knows each other very well, and that can take teams a long way. But yeah, I think it's unfortunate for them that this draw, because you've got, I mean, if Nigeria hit their stride, it's going to be very difficult for them. And then the hosts, who, it could work the other way and they struggle. But as two decent sides making up the group, I mean, it's a really difficult group. But maybe in another group they would have they have a really good chance of coming in the top 2. But it might be difficult for them. But as their results show, there are no pushovers, and they'll be very organised. I noticed just for Premier League watchers, Emilio Insu is still a captain, going strong at 34. He used to play
third division in Spain now.
Yeah, third division in Spain. It's brilliant. I love these stories. But like players like that, they always tend to raise their, they're so experienced, they know exactly what they're doing, tend to be really good in tournaments like this, and the experience counts for a hell of a lot, I'm sure they've got a new generation of players as well complementing that. So, and a lot of these players from Equatorial Guinea are brought up in Spanish academies and play in Spain, and really, really good technically. So they'll be, and similarly with Guinea-Bissau as well, a lot of players, Portuguese link, and a lot of them are in Portuguese academies or have been or play in Portugal now. So again, very technically good. I think it's really, really interesting group. There's going to be some close games in it, and Ivory Coast might. I don't know. Yeah, they should be okay getting through, but they're not in their best shape they've been for a while. So could be tough for them.
Let's talk about the Ivory Coast. They're hosting the tournament. The opening matches against Guinea-Bissau. I think the Ivory Coast is a team, in my opinion, that has been a bit up and down. I think they, for quite some time, had fallen off after continually being one of Africa's best for a very long time. I feel like their arrow's pointing up, though. Joe, I know that you've looked at the Ivory Coast squad a lot. Are you encouraged by who they're bringing to the tournament in addition to the home advantage, or are you a little bit skeptical and think more perhaps that they may rely on their home crowd to push them a little bit further than perhaps they otherwise would?
No, I think they have everything in their squad right now that they need to win the thing, and obviously being at home is going to be a huge advantage. So yeah, for me, they're definitely a heavy favorite, and I'm excited to watch them. I will say that Zaha's not in the squad. There's no Eric Bailey. He's coming back from an injury. Plus, he just moved to Villarreal. So I think that's maybe a combination for why he's not there. There's a couple fun. I mean, there's talent all throughout this squad. It's ridiculous. But 2 players that I've kind of picked out ones to watch. Wilfred Singo, I think, is a great player, playing at Monaco, and then Simon Adingra. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get. He's also coming back from an injury, but he's there, and so yeah, he's been a lot of fun to watch at Brighton as well. So two big talents.
I don't know if playing at home is an advantage for this young Ivorian team. The AFCON has had 7 different winners in the last 7 editions, and none of them has been from the host nations. So it's kind of
It's like the curse.
Good stat, Rahman. Very good stat.
Because of the way the tournament is set up, what could be an advantage immediately you don't start well could turn out to be a disadvantage. And I think the 3rd best team will qualify to the knockout stages. So there's room that some teams will begin to pick up from the knockout stages. You've mentioned players to look out, and I mean, Adinkra is quite really good for Brighton. He's shown signs of being very quick and got a couple of Premier League goals. I remember watching him when he came to play here at Chelsea, and I found that he was quite willing, he was quite rapid, and there's no hiding it. I would have loved to see Wilfred Zaha go, and the story of Zaha in the Ivory Coast is quite really one painful one, because when Zaha was at Palace, and I used to ask Patrick Vieira, was the coach then, about Zaha's commitment to the Ivory Coast, and he'd always say to me that Zaha was quite really interested and quite committed to the Ivory Coast. He's moved now to Turkey, and you can tell there's something going on there. Prior to that, he was always pulling himself up. There's no hiding from the fact that this is not the Ivorian of old. We need to say it as it is. When Ivory Coast had big players like Yaya Toure, Kolo Toure, Didier Drogba, even the intimidation the names gave, where they literally could beat a team before they go onto the pitch. This time it's not the same. It's not the same Ivorians we knew, but that's why the AFCON is such an interesting competition. When teams have their backs against the wall, they are able to come up and do really interesting. And I don't think this will be a major competition for the Ivorians for a lot of reasons, including organization. Even putting the whole competition together, there have been a lot of infrastructural issues and all that. But for the footballing side, I really don't see that. I see the name and I see why people think it's going to be big, but I think the Ivorians will struggle here.
Just one thing to say, Kolo is there, isn't he? Kolo Toure is the assistant coach, yeah. I think. So that might give him a hand. But yeah, so they have got some good players, but yeah, I think that just a bit inexperienced maybe in the right positions. But yeah, we'll see. They could prove us wrong.
All right, that does it for Group A. I think Group A is going to be a very interesting one. I think a lot of question marks coming out of Group A in terms of 4 teams that have potential but aren't necessarily super convincing for our panel. So Group A is definitely going to be a good one to watch. We're going to head down to Group B. So in Group B, we've got Egypt, Ghana, Cape Verde, and Mozambique. And looking at this group, it appears there's a strong top 2 in Egypt and Ghana. Mozambique is a bit of a wild card. It's been some time since they've been at AFCON. It's actually been the longest of any of the teams in the field. Their last appearance at AFCON was 2010. And Cape Verde is a team that hasn't really gotten over the hump. They continue to be strong, but it seems like when they get to play against some better competition, they're not able to really overcome that higher level opponent. So Egypt and Ghana on paper look like a top 2. Rahman, we talked about Ghana a little bit before. Why don't we start with you and Ghana and your thoughts heading into AFCON?
I'm quite caught in between hope and expectations, because it's quite really a different Ghana team. Again, it's like the Ivory Coast. We've faded so much from the team that was the best in Africa in 2010 at the World Cup. And when people hear Ghana, the first picture that comes to mind is a South Africa 2010. It's a lot of generations, and it's a different team. Our biggest superstar now will be Mohamed Kudus, who is actually even nursing an injury now. As we record this, he's not even in the Ghana camp at the moment. So we are under a pragmatic manager who Chris Hughton, you know him from his time in the Premier League when he was coach of Brighton and even Nottingham Forest in the Championship. What the hope is that we've got some really exciting individual players. Again, like Nigeria and Ghana are quite like siblings. We have the same problems in that individually very exciting players. If you watch Spanish football, you'll be excited to have Inaki Williams in your team. But then if you see Inaki Williams play in Ghana, you're like, hold on a minute, is he the one? Do you understand? So that's the problem. We've got Jiku, who plays in Turkey. He's a really good centre back. We've got Mohamed Salis, who was a Southampton, really tough, big, reads the game quite really well. And I mean, we've got individual players with incredible technique. Kamal Dean Suleimana will not be making the competition, but we're not really worried because we've got a very speedster in Enes Nioma, who signed a big deal from to go to Lyon from Nordirland, and he's gone to the French league and he's excelling quite really well. So individually the players are there, but then the results and the way we play don't match the profile of players we've got at this particular moment. But tournament football, I remember quite well when we last got to the final in 2015, ironically against the Ivory Coast, when we lost on penalties. It was just a similar story of a lot of big players not making the tournament and not a lot of hope and expectations on the Black Stars. And they went all the way and got to the final and nearly won it. So there's room for that hope to grow. And there's that feeling that if the Black Stars can look at the last two disappointing tournaments, the last AFCON was incredibly disappointing. The World Cup was so disappointing. This is an opportunity to right all those two tournaments wrongs. So if this group of players, and a lot of them in their final legs at this particular moment, can't get themselves to perform in the Ivory Coast, which, by the way, Ghana will feel like it's a home tournament because we share a border with the Ivorians, so you'll expect to see a very large Ghanaian contingent in Ivory Coast. Then it's really hard to see. We've changed managers, we've changed players. We've got to find a way of playing and playing well and trying to get to the last stages of this AFCON.
Yeah, I was going to say, Rom, at least you don't have to play Comoros this time.
Yeah, but that's an example.
Because they also lost to them in the World Cup qualifiers, didn't they, in November?
We did.
Right. I mean,
but playing in Moroni, that's tough.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, Chris Hughton's an interesting one, isn't he? Because obviously everyone from Brighton, he was very negative, his style, and it's quite that's not what Ghanaian fans want to see, is it?
I wouldn't say negative. I would say a bit quite defensive. To be fair,
he played two defensive midfielders at home. Yeah, when you get like a Drisu Baba and you get like, I mean, is it necessary? You have to rely on a last minute set piece to win your match before you fly out to Comoros. So people do feel like he is a little bit cautious. Yeah,
he does. That's a feeling. But then you see again, we've not played quite well whenever we've tried to play expansive kind of football. You think that our best players now in the team are not the most exciting ones. I mean, having said so, I'm catching a break on Mohamed Kudus because he's been sensational. So he's an exception. But before Kudus, our biggest star was Thomas Partey, he was more like a progressor of a midfielder, and he will be missing this competition through injury. Then our defenders and mostly sometimes our fullbacks were quite really our top players. I'm not sure, and I'm not holding brief for Chris Hughton or the managers before him. I think that the best way to get the best out of these crop of players is not entirely to take your hand off the brake, but to find a way where they can play exciting football and still keep an eye on defense, because whenever we've tried to go after teams, we haven't exactly done quite well. But hopefully this is the competition a change. The Ayew brothers are still there. So we've got experience in Andre Ayew. who, by the way, will become easily the player with the most AFCON appearance if he gets onto the pitch in the Ivory Coast. And he's been going at a lot. I think the record holder, I need to check that, but the record holder is Robert Song, who is now the coach of Cameroon. But Ayew will overtake him if he plays in all the 3 group games that are guaranteed, and if Ghana is able to excel. His younger brother actually plays for your team, Ed, Crystal Palace. Jordan Ayew, he's the most foul.
Oh yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean, the most foul player in the Premier League. As, I keep saying that he should get a trophy for it, shouldn't he? But no, I mean, I think Ghana are up against it though, because just I'll widen the discussion. Egypt, and Maher, you know a lot more about Egypt probably than I do, but they look like a team on a mission after last time, and they have a lot of pedigree in their team. Trezeguet is the evergreen. Trezeguet keeps rolling on, and yeah, they're going to be tough to stop in winning that group, I'd say.
Yeah, just a quick word on Ghana before I move on to Egypt. I think I don't like to make simplistic analysis, but I do think it's sometimes as simple as Ghana will go as far as Mohamed Kudus takes them, especially in attack. I think they'll be able to defend well. But this is truly what I believe. I know it's a lot of what Ghanaian supporters believe, but I don't know if it's necessarily the right analysis. But I that's how I feel in my heart of hearts at the moment. And the thing about Kudus is that I think his self-belief is off the charts. Every time I listen to him speak, or he really believes that he can be the man for Ghana and he can take them to the promised land in a sense. So it's not like it's out of his realm of possibility at all. But I do think Egypt are the favorites in this group. Egypt are, of course, 7-time champions, the most successful team in the African Cup of Nations. And they've made it to the finals 2 out of the last 3 tournaments, 2017 and 2021. Last time around, they lost in penalty shootouts after, I think, winning in penalty shootouts in the quarterfinals and the semifinals.
There were a lot. There were a lot of shootouts, penalty shootouts.
So, but the thing is, Egypt, as Rahman was saying that people remember Ghana of 2010, and I think in Egypt we also had this image of the 2006 to 2010 teams, of this free-flowing technical football. But very recently, under Hector Cooper in 2017, under Carlos Queiroz in 2021, these are the coaches that took Egypt to the final. The football hasn't been as technical, it hasn't been as daring, it hasn't been as free-flowing. And a lot of Egyptians in particular were not happy with this. They felt like it was too defensive, too pragmatic. They were dragging teams out into penalty shootouts, doing a great job in the penalty shootouts. They would slip out this magical water bottle with each of the opposing penalty kick takers and which way they usually went to the goalkeeper, and the goalkeeper would check the water bottle in between kicks, and they'd do a great job. But they hired a new coach now, Rui Vitória from Portugal, formerly Benfica and Spartak Moscow, and Nasser in Saudi Arabia as well. And they gave him a 4-year contract. And that's unprecedented in Egypt, for them to give a 4-year contract to a foreign manager. And they've also sort of slipped it into his ear that we'd like to be a little more balanced if possible. And actually, I think Pep Guardiola wrote in his book about Rui Vitória that his Benfica side were the toughest to break down defensively. The way they set up, they were very, very tough to break down. And so he has that element to it. But Egyptians do feel like since he's come, they've been more balanced in attack as well. And part of that is also due to the form of their front line. Ed talked about Trezeguet. Trezeguet was at Aston Villa. People think he made a step down and he went to Turkey. But every time he plays with the national team, he seems to come up and score big goals for them and step up in big moments. We don't need to talk about Mohamed Salah, who's been absolutely fantastic again at the beginning of this year for Liverpool. In Egypt, they seem to think he might be a little bit more of a creator this year instead of just a finisher. And that's because they have 2 other very good forwards in great form. Omar Marmoush from Eintracht Frankfurt, who has been one of the more impressive players in the Bundesliga, and also Mustafa Mohamed, who in the last 18 months in France has made a name for himself with Nantes. So they have, in my opinion, alongside Nigeria, one of the most informed front lines. And what I like about Egypt is that they're coherent. They know what they have to do. They know that they're going to have to be scrappy in midfield, recycle possession, and get it out to that front line. And they're going to do what they need to do. So Egypt, I do think, are probably one of my favorites, in my opinion, for this tournament.
And just to add, go on, Ed. Go.
I totally agree, and yeah, just on kudos as well, 100%. Like he could take Ghana anywhere really, but yeah, and just to, I know it's very simplistic to focus on the star players all the time, but again with Egypt, I think you have to talk about Salah and the fact that he hasn't won it with them, and it is so driving him so much like to win it, especially after what happened last time.
An Egyptian supporter told me last time, Mohamed Salah is without a doubt the best Egyptian player of all time, but he's not the greatest because he's never won an AFCON, and Abu Trika's won 3. So that just to expound on what Ed was saying.
Yeah, exactly, and that's gonna it's gonna be absolutely driving him, and he's in great form as well. A few people were saying Liverpool, I'm gonna miss him, but I mean, if you watch that Newcastle game the other day, it was just unbelievable. And as a creator as well as a goal scorer, like you said, so could be exciting, and it'd be good to see Egypt with the shackles off a bit because, like you say, the last few tournaments it's been pretty dull, and they've got and the natural game is flair and attacking football with so I think they're going to take some stopping in that group, but again the other two teams are a little bit unknown. Well, Cape Verde probably not so unknown because we know they're going to be decent, and then Mozambique are interesting because they haven't been there for a long time, but very I used to live in South Africa and there was quite a few Mozambican players there, and the heritage of skill of Eusebio, obviously that's where he was from originally, and they produce a lot of talented players, so they're going to be up against it, but it should be interesting to see how they fare against the two big teams.
Yeah,
and just go ahead, Rahman.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the Egypt thing just briefly. Egypt's biggest problem will be the fact that, North African countries just don't win in the south of the Sahara. This is the problem for them. Mohamed Salah's got 18 goals. If he can get even half of that for Egypt, I'm sure they'll be up there with some of the tough teams to go through. But I think the last time a country from North Africa won an AFCON
was Egypt.
Was in
2010.
Egypt, 2010. And even if you want more statistics, especially when I said that host countries don't win it, Egypt was the last country to host and win it in 2006. So, and these stories actually make the AFCON quite really interesting because the North African countries literally don't do well in the south of the Sahara. But if Egypt can overcome that, like everybody rightly said, they are the team to watch. Because Salah, like you rightly said, he's easily the greatest Egyptian, easily one of the most popular African names you'll ever see. I think he's underrated. I think in the world, if you're talking of top 3 players in the world, Mohamed Salah should be on it. Whether he's creating, he's scored, what he's doing at Liverpool, literally he's banged in 18 goals and nobody's finding that interesting. That's how great Salah is. Like imagine, like any top striker, like last season, people think Salah didn't play well. Check his numbers. He's so great. Nobody really sees what he does as great again. So this for me, my biggest problem with them is that where the competition is held, historically, North African teams just don't crack it there.
We will see. I want to make one quick point on Egypt, Maher. I agree with you. I think the formula for Egypt might be a little bit different at this tournament than it has been in the past. And I think that gets me more excited to watch them than I have been. And I'm definitely looking forward to that. And then, Joe, I just wanted to come to you real quick before we wrap up Group B and talk briefly about Cape Verde, because I think they're a strong team. And you look at it's not just going to be the top 2 out of every single group to advance. You're also going to get some third-place teams that advance. Do you think Cape Verde has got enough quality to be one of those teams that gets out of the group stage?
Oh gosh. Well, I think they have the quality. They're a very balanced team, and I like a lot about them. One player in particular who's caught my eye is Logan Costa, who's having a really good season with Toulouse in France. He's probably going to start, and he's kind of bounced back and forth between either center back or at the 6 for Cape Verde, but he does play center back for Toulouse, and he's having a really good season. So wanted to make sure we highlighted him. But in terms of for a 3rd place finish, I don't know. That's tough because I think Egypt and Ghana might grab max points against them. So I don't know. That's a really good question, and I'll be curious if the panel wants to weigh in on that further. But in terms of what they can do, I mean, you can't rule them out. And I think for Ghana, we've seen a little bit of inconsistency, and Cape Verde could very well be a team that might punch them a little bit. I think Mozambique also could maybe throw a wrench in some plans. I don't want to say that they're going to get out of the group, but they've got Reinildo at Atletico Madrid, Jenny Katamo at Sporting Lisbon. He's good. He wasn't with them in November, but he's kind of the new Mozambique number 10, and so they're going to.
He's really, really good.
Yeah, a lot of their play is going to go through him. So yeah, it's those other two teams in the group are definitely punchy sides and definitely capable, I think, of throwing some wrenches. Can they be a third place team to get out of here? I don't know.
Let's see.
It's tough, isn't it? Because like you say, they're probably going to have to get a draw against one of the big teams, but not necessarily a win might be enough to take you through as a third place team. But yeah, you're probably going to need to draw against Ghana or Egypt and then beat the other one.
Mozambique are in their 5th AFCON. They've never won a match at an AFCON, so they're chasing their first win at an AFCON. I watched them because they're in the same World Cup qualifying group as Algeria, so I watched them recently. They're actually very compact, especially at home. You mentioned Reinaldo. They also have Mesher, who's like a very, very experienced center half as well. He had a long career at Rennes in France. He had a lot of quality as well. So what they tend to do is actually, close up those half spaces, sit back, play a low block, and then they'll try to use the creativity of Jenny Katamo, who you highlighted as well, in attack and try to score a goal, but it doesn't often work. So they're a side that I could see, drawing two matches, but that not being enough. But will they frustrate a team like Ghana? That's why Ghana scares me, because I don't know. I trust in their ability to do everything except score goals, and that's why I'm a little bit like, I have a little bit of trepidation for Ghana, but we'll see.
All right.
Rahman, I have to say, Rahman does look a bit nervous.
Not really. I agree with
know,
it. I agree with him. You just never know which Ghana side will turn up. That's the problem.
I think you're scarred a little bit from the last one as well. Obviously, it wasn't.
Yeah.
In the last 4 matches, Ghana have scored a goal, and they played against tough opposition: Mexico, USA. But they only scored against Madagascar in the last minute on a set piece. So that them scoring goals under Chris Hughton is what I'm kind of like.
Yeah.
I hope they can get it together, but I'm not 100% sure. Until I see it, I can't really endorse it.
Can I just ask, is anybody surprised that Chris Hughton is still there? Like, given kind of recent results, or not really? Like, am I over exaggerating that? Because I'm a little surprised that he's actually still there.
That's a good question. The problem is he's not winning games, but he's not necessarily losing games. The ones he lost were the friendly ones, which were kind of really games you expect Ghana to lose. His biggest problem is that he's underperforming performance-wise, and that's where a lot of people are questioning if he's the right man to see. I think the back will stop at this AFCON, though, because if we go to the AFCON, anything short of a semi-final place, then he's got himself to blame. So he's earned the right to go to the competition, but will he be there after 8? We all don't know.
Yeah.
All right, let's head down to Group C. Group C's got Senegal, Cameroon, Guinea, and Gambia. And for me, at least on paper, I think Senegal stands out. They are, of course, the defending champions. And Cameroon is a team for me that I think is gonna not find it overly easy to get out of this group. I think Guinea and the Gambia are going to be tough opposition. Before we get into Cameroon, let's start with Senegal. In my mind, they've got the quality to repeat. I think they are still one of Africa's best. They're bringing a team that is still very, very talented. Sadio Mane is, of course, moved to Saudi Arabia, but still, in my opinion, a world-class player. What are the panel's thoughts about Senegal? Is this a team that can repeat and become back-to-back Africa Cup of Nations champions?
I would say that they can. Yeah. The only concern with them, I mean, uncertain, definitely can. I mean, they've got the pedigree, experience, etc. The only question is, I think, with Senegal, for me, is goal scoring. They tend to be quite boring under Cisse, and that's the approach, and that's just the way it is. But can they add a bit of flair that they need? And also, they have a lot of great. I mean, they always have a lot of players, but they have a really great generation of players coming through. I mean, obviously, Pape Sarr is going to be front and center of the team, but just how much he uses some of the younger players, like Lamine Camara, who's just been voted Young African Player of the Year, who's at Metz, attacking midfielder. Yeah, it depends. I mean, he's kind of like a number 10, but so it depends on how they want to play it. But I imagine that he'll go with the tried and tested, and it'll probably pay off for them to an extent. But whether it will be enough to go all the way again, I don't know. But they're surely going to get through the group and go deep into the tournament, I'd say.
I mean, asking Senegal to win it again is asking them to make the final for the third time on the Spain. That's hard. If you follow the African terrain, it's hard because
they've got the experience, but I suppose you need some luck as well to do.
You do. You need an injection of new players. You need exciting players with a point to prove. The core of this team is a core of the team that was taking not the last tournament they won, but even the one in Egypt in 2019. And if you look at the strength of the players they had, they won it when the sun was just setting on some of the big players' career. Don't get me wrong, Sadio was still at Liverpool and was still banging. Khalid was still at Napoli and was still banging. Then they had Ismail Assar, who was at Watford, but was tipped to actually be the next Sadio Mane. What they've got now is just two players who everybody thinks will become great players. Pape Sarr, you mentioned at Tottenham, and Nicolas Jackson, who could really be an interesting tool to throw in the AFCON. He struggled a bit in the Premier League, but maybe this is the break he needs. Sometimes players just go to major tournaments and they just kick on. Senegal's biggest problem, and it's their blessing also, is Aliou, because the way Aliou plays, he goes with what he trusts and what he knows. And Aliou literally won the AFCON playing three holding midfielders in the middle with no creativity. Honestly, he believes in that mentality that if you're not scoring, then you shouldn't be conceding. And so don't be surprised that they continue to do the same thing, grind out gains, and just build, and go up. I have no doubt they will qualify from this group. But the big question is, do they have enough in the tank to go to three different finals on the Spain? I think they will be the first African to do it, if not one of the first Africans to go to three different finals. So that will be really a big...
Egypt won 3. 2006,
Egypt won 3. Yeah, Egypt won 3 on the go. But Senegal will become the second to be going to final. Not winning it, but at least reaching finals up on the back. The qualities in the squad, my feeling is that they're just not the same team.
No, I largely agree. What Rahman, I think, is saying is that you look at the spine of Edouard Mendy, Kalidou Koulibaly, Idrissa Gana Gueye, Cheikhou Kouyaté, Sadio Mane. They've all made those moves to Saudi Arabia. It seems like they're all over the hill a bit, right? And that was the strength. That was the core of that older generation. And you have a younger generation, as Ed's saying, Pape Sarr, Lamine Camara. These are players that are going to be, I think, like Champions League players, in a few years. Players that are going to be, the new stars in European football as well. But they're 18, 19 years old, 20 years old. And you just have that question, are you between generations here? How does Aliou Cisse manage that transition?
Yeah.
Is it going to be one of those, like that cliche of, we have the right mix of experience and youth, or is it going to be one of those things where we haven't really been able to manage that transition, and as a result, we faltered later on in the group stages, later on in the tournament? But I do agree that I think they'll get out of the group, but the question is how far can they go after that?
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it's not an easy group at all, is it? This has been billed as the group of death, isn't it? This one in particular, because the Gambia were fantastic in the last tournament, and are not to be underestimated. And obviously Cameroon, who are always strong, and Guinea, who've got lots of star players coming in this year, haven't they? Obviously, and it's so. I mean, I suppose there is a chance that Senegal could. If they're not at it, and the other teams are. You never know, because the way that they play, I mean, it's no risk, but then it is a risk, because if it's 0-0 and the other team nicks a goal towards the end rather than you nick the goal, then there's not a long way, but it's not easy to get back into it. So yeah, I mean, I if I was going to put money on Senegal, I don't think they are probably favourites on paper, but I think it is going to be a big ask with all of those experienced players who are now playing in Saudi Arabia, especially Koulibaly. I mean, he fell off a cliff, didn't he, in the Premier League? He really just came and was found out as being probably past his best. So yeah, and he was massive for them in the last couple of tournaments, wasn't he? So going to be interesting.
There's even a 16-year-old that they're talking about as being the very next Sadio Mane. His name's Amara Diouf, and he was incredible.
Is he 16 now? I thought he was 15 when he made his debut.
He might be 15. He might be.
Yeah,
he might be 15.
He was a runner-up in the African young player. I know who you mean. He's at Generation Foot.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
but I don't think he made
Lamine Camara. He's 15.
He was
no,
born
he hasn't
in
made the squad yet, but
he was born in 2008. If that makes anybody here feel old.
He has been called up with the senior side, but he hasn't.
Yeah, he's made his debut.
He hasn't been called up to the AFCON.
Yeah, amazing.
So that's one to keep an eye out. Him with Pat Matar Sarr and Lamine Camara. You could see that Senegal, they just keep producing these quality players through the Generation Foot Academy, through the Mets pipeline, and into your Champions League television screens.
I think obviously that generation should be really exciting to watch. But I think you might be right. They might be caught in between that, especially and Kouyaté as well. I mean, he's been around forever, hasn't he, and still going strong.
Checo would always.
But then the experience in the tournament is you can't buy that. So yeah.
Well, speaking of perhaps vulnerability, I want to talk about Cameroon a little bit, because Cameroon is a team that came out of the last AFCON and there was a lot of optimism. They're a team that considerably performs much better at home than they do away from home. They were hosting the last AFCON. There was a lot of optimism that they would be able to repeat their 2017 title. It did not happen. I don't know that Cameroon's gotten better over the last 2 years. And you look at this group, and it was mentioned that perhaps this is the group of death with Guinea and the Gambia. Cameroon feels a little vulnerable to me here. Am I overreacting?
I don't think you're over. I actually really like the starting 11 in Cameroon. And again, here's the thing where I think you look at players and how they perform at their clubs in Europe, and then you look at them and how they perform at AFCONs. And somebody like Vincent Aboubakar, I think, has probably had a more underwhelming career, a club career at least, than when you look at him at the AFCONs. He's the one that won them in 2017 AFCON by himself. Yeah, he scored 8 goals in the last tournament. If they had Brian Mbeumo in the form he was in earlier on in the Premier League, I mean, on that right wing with Karl Toko Ekambi, who's another proven commodity in the AFCON, on the left wing, and Aboubakar up top, that's really, really good. Zambo and Gisa behind them in midfield. Even Ney, who's a ball-carrying midfielder. They have a lot of good defenders that you don't hear about much. Somebody like Darlin Yongwa, for example, at Lorient. I think he started every match. Might have missed a few matches, actually, but he's been very, very good at left back. Christopher Wu. These are all like solid, consistent starters in France that you don't hear much about, but you usually play well together as a unit. My main problem with Cameroon is Rigobert Song. I don't really buy that he's a good coach. I think he's obviously a legendary player, somebody that's probably well respected as a personality. He doesn't have his pro license, if I'm not mistaken. I don't understand why Samuel Eto'o made him coach, except for the fact that they probably know each other and they're probably friends. Rigobert Song,
they do know each other and they are friends.
Yeah,
just to confirm that.
I mean, Song coached the Olympic team before and didn't have great results. And I think the thing that saved his skin really was qualifying with the last kick of the game to the World Cup against Algeria.
That's what I was going to go out. I was like,
yeah, dagger through my heart. But I just don't understand how I think it was just the quality of the players. And I don't think he knows who his best 11 are. I don't think he knows. Sometimes during the World Cup press conference, he didn't know how to pronounce 2 or 3 of his players' names. And it's not because he didn't know how to pronounce it. It's because he didn't know who they were, I think. I don't think he's the one that's selecting the team. I'm not sure he's the one that's naming the team. A lot of people believe it's his assistant coach, Sebastian Minya. Did I get that right? I believe former Kenya coach. They think he's the one that's actually lining up the tactics, and he's the one that's actually coaching the team. But you can't coach that way, you know. And on top of all of that, he falls out with certain of his players, like Andre Onana, kicking him out, you know, halfway through the World Cup as well, because Andre Onana wanted to distribute the ball with his feet a little too much. Apparently, that was the reason why, you know. And then a little bit of talking back, and he's home. So that's where with Cameroon, I think with a proper coach, that starting 11 with what they've proven at AFCONs, I think, and you know, Cameroon, they have that footballing heritage. Besides Egypt, they're the most successful national team in the AFCON. I would have had more confidence then, but it's just, I don't like to say this, but it's just Rigobert Song that's really making me hesitate with them.
You know, Cameroon's biggest achievement in the last few years is qualifying for that World Cup, and surprisingly enough, it came under Song, which is that. And even the World Cup in Qatar, I think they beat Brazil, no? They beat Brazil.
Yeah, it was like a B team, but they still beat them. And Vincent Aboubakar, who didn't start, I think, the first 2 games. Again, why Rigobert Song? He finally plays him in the 3rd game, and he scores that beautiful goal, and they beat Brazil's B team. But yeah.
The thing with Cameroon is that, again, you can never take away the influence of somebody like Samuel Eto'o. You can discuss whatever you like. Whoever the manager is, they're going to be a joystick to the FA president, and that's the fact. It's Eto'o who makes the whole call. And I'd like to concentrate on the page, and they had a really fantastic AFCON. Actually, I was there in Cameroon, and I thought they should have gone to the final. They were incredibly unlucky, and they went to play it in a stadium where they never lose, and for some fun, they lost in that stadium, which is kind of really interesting. But I mean, yeah, Brian Mbeumo, it's a big loss to them. But they've got Clinton and Jay in that team, you know, and Clinton and Jay is really experienced now these days. If you still have Clinton and Jay, Vincent Aboubakar, and Carl Toko Ekambi, my player of the tournament in the last AFCON. Honestly, I love watching Toko Ekambi. And even in
5
Europe,
goals.
Oh my God, it's easy to see the goals, but the amount of work, the load of work, he loves playing for his country. He loves playing for the AFCON. Actually, he enjoys playing in the AFCON. And even this 3, it's not the same with Mbeumo, but even if they can get this top 3 going, and Anguissa, for me, underrated on form. Like, he's actually one of the main reasons Napoli won the Scudetto last year. I mean, you can talk about what's his name, Osimhen and all that, but I mean, Anguissa is really good. So they've got really a solid team, like Maher said. And yeah, the question mark we all have under Song, this competition gives us the answer to that. So hold your guns. Let's see.
I do just want to point out one additional thing on Cameroon. They ended up in a qualifying group with only 3 teams, them, Burundi, and Namibia. And all they needed to do was not finish 3rd of those 3 teams. And it took them until the final match day to do that. So not a super convincing qualifying campaign from Cameroon at all.
Or a team that knows how to hold its nerves, as proven by their World Cup qualification and their AFCON qualification.
But they are here. And Joe, I want to hear about the other 2 teams in Guinea and Gambia. Do you think either of those 2 teams could overtake Cameroon or even Senegal?
Well, so before we jump there, I just want to point out, I think one to watch for Cameroon in this tournament could be Faris Moumbagna.
I knew you wanted to mention him. I apologize for jumping over that.
That's okay. Our listeners will know I'm a big Nordic Leagues fan. So he plays for Bodo Glimt, who just won the Elite Syrian in Norway. And so I have to mention him because I think, well, he had an outstanding season with them, first of all, and I think he's going to be a good addition to Cameroon. This is only like his 2nd camp that he's coming in for. So a fairly new face for the squad, but I think one with a lot of talent that could be a really good addition, maybe coming off the bench and scoring some goals for Cameroon. So in terms of Guinea and the Gambia, yeah, so this is actually one of those groups where I think we could see a 3rd place team come out of it, because I think Guinea cannot be underestimated here. I think they're really stacked. There's a lot of talent throughout this entire team. They just seem to, at the end of the day, they seem to like struggle to put it all together for whatever reason. Like they haven't been able to make that next step to get into like the later stages of the knockout rounds, right? So yeah, lots of talent. You know, you've got Naby Keita, you've got Amadou Diawara, you've got Serhou Guirassy, who's like lighting up the Bundesliga in Germany. He's got 19 goals across all competitions this season so far, which is ridiculous. You got Ali Kamara, Morgan Guilavogi. There's definitely a lot of talent with Guinea. I would say two names that I haven't mentioned yet that you should watch for during this AFCON. Mohamed Bayo is one of them. He's a Lille player, but he's on loan at Le Havre. I don't know if I pronounced that right. My French is not great, but then him. So he's a very talented player. I'm excited to watch him, and then Iliax Moriba as well, who plays at Leipzig. Two very talented players. They tend to kind of roll out in like a 4-2-3-1 formation. At least that's what they did in November for their World Cup qualifiers. So, you know, Moriba kind of runs the center of the park, along with I think Keita's behind him, and so anyways, yeah, I'm excited to watch Guinea, and I think they have the ability to get some points off of maybe Cameroon and Senegal, and sneak into maybe that third place position. I don't know if the rest of the panel agrees with me or not, but you can chime in, I guess, in just a second, because for the Gambia, just real quick, I love the Gambia. I love the talent in this team. There's definitely a lot, and that's what makes it the group of death, right? But they're not really coming into this AFCON in great form. Like they lost both their World Cup qualifiers in November, which was included a loss to Burundi. So for me, like they haven't really found a way to score against bigger opposition. And this group has 3 in Guinea, Cameroon, and Senegal. So I'm a little worried about that. But there's still a ton of talent. Ibrahim Macaulay at Young Boys, Alassane Mane at Odense in Denmark, James Gomez at Sparta Prague, and then of course you've got the likes of Moussa Baro and Hassan Cisse, right? And then of course, who I think is going to become the star boy if he's not already, Yankuba Minty at Feyenoord, is having a really great season for his club, and I think he could be a real star for the Gambia.
I was just going to say, I like both these countries because they both produce lots and lots of players, and they're a little bit. It's kind of not the traditional strongholds of players, you know, like Senegal, and you know, like they're especially. I mean, the Gambia is very recent, and some of the younger players are making real waves, aren't they, across Europe? And yeah, so it'd be good if they could back up. Last time they did so well, same manager, a lot of the same players. So they're going to be decent, and yeah, Guinea, it's just Moriba especially is a real find. Kaito, I was just having a look. I'm not sure he's been playing much at all for Werder Bremen since he's gone there, but again, I mean, he's got experience, but yeah, and we know on his day he can be fantastic. But and then Guirassy, who I had the honour of interviewing earlier this season, was a really nice guy, really down to earth, and I'd like to think that he can carry this on. It's not just a flash in the pan. I think he is very, very motivated to play for Guinea as well, even though it's kind of, you know, he wants to leave and wants to come to the Premier League probably in this month. He's very motivated. I spoke to him the day after he was nominated for the African Player of the Year, and it was like that was the proudest thing that he'd achieved. So it means a lot to him to play for Guinea, and yeah, I think they've got a decent chance. But it's going to be tight games in that group. That's what I'd say. I think, well, probably not now I've said that, but yeah, I think there's going to be some really cracking games in that group. Should be great to watch.
All right. Let's head over to Group D, and I think Group C is definitely one that is going to be really interesting to watch. It feels wide open, and Joe, I agree. I think the Gambia not coming in the best form, but I certainly think that all 4 teams in this group have a decent shot to get out of it, especially as one of the best third place finishers. So I don't know that I can say the same about Group D, because Group D features Algeria, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and Angola. I would not call this group the group of death. I think Algeria has to be thrilled with this draw. And Maher, I'll go immediately to you. Any reason why Algeria should not finish top of Group D?
No, there's no reason really. I think Burkina Faso, again, are a side that maybe we underestimate. If you look at 2017 and 2021, they made the semifinals both times. So that's pretty good results very recently in the AFCON. They also have Burkina Faso are interesting. I mean, they're probably the opposite of Guinea. You know, Guinea are a side where you look at their Wikipedia and you look at their squad list, you say, oh, they have a lot of really interesting players that are performing really well at, great clubs like Girassi, like Moriba, like Diawara, like Keita. And then if you look at Burkina Faso and you look at the midfield of Ibrahim Blati Toure, Gustavo Sangare, you're like, who the hell are these players? Playing in the third. But when they play at AFCONs, I swear they'll make your superstar look bad. I don't know how it happens. It just happens. That's what AFCONs are like. And Burkina Faso, I mean, they do have a lot of good young talent. Unfortunately, blanking on the guy's name, Ajax, Shakhtar Donetsk, the striker, Lassina Traore. Lassina Traore he's been struggling with injury for the last 4 or 5 years because they're really missing a target man. But Bertrand Traore is a player that's been playing with them, I think, since the age of 16 or something, and he's really been a great as a captain. They have so many different options from the left wing. The midfield, like I said, is really industrious, and they make your midfield look bad. Edmund Tapsoba, of course, everybody knows, is, in my opinion, one of the best center halves in Europe, currently playing at Bayer Leverkusen. Even a player like Issa Kabore had a great AFCON last time. He has so much speed down the right wing that it makes it difficult to plan against, And so Adamo Nagalo is another player, 21 years old, like as a center half, might not even play, but just really talented. So Burkina Faso they could challenge Algeria, I think, but there's no reason for Algeria not to finish first and get through the next round, except for the fact that in 2021, we said the exact same thing in a group with Equatorial Guinea, Sierra Leone, and the Ivory Coast, and they crashed out after being on a 35-match unbeaten streak. So that's the AFCON for you. Algeria is coming into this tournament with a little bit of a revamp. They're bringing in a lot of new players, players like Wolves fullback Reynate Nouri, Rennes forward Emin Guiri, who's actually just been ruled out with an injury, Roma midfielder Houssam Aouar, Eintracht Frankfurt midfielder Faris Shaibi, Sheffield United fullback Yasser Laroussi. These are all players that are like under the age of 24, 25 that Jamal Belmadi sort of brought in to sort of replace a lot of the older players from the 2019 generation that won the AFCON.
Amora too.
Yeah, Mohamed Amin Amoura is somebody that you should watch out for. I think he has 13 goals in 14 matches for Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. Mm-hmm. And of those 14 matches, I think he's only started 8 of them. So he's somebody that's been scoring with incredible efficiency and who's been linked with some of the biggest clubs in Europe at the moment. So there's a lot of new players, but the main reason for pessimism from a lot of Algeria fans is that they haven't really been clicking and they haven't been convincingly beating opponents over the last year or so since they've been blooding in these new players. They just don't pass the eye test. It doesn't look as good as it did in 2019 and 2020. That's really the main thing that is holding people back. They feel like sometimes Algeria's play can be much too horizontal. It can be a lot of sterile possession, too many unnecessary passes, too many backwards passes, and they don't really put teams to the sword. And so that's it. I mean, everybody's just really in wait and see mode because they had great expectations last time around and that those didn't materialize.
I imagine there's a big point to prove that, amongst the players. They're pretty hungry for it because, after what happened last time, same with Ghana as well. If you are embarrassed, next time you come back, with a point to prove. And I think Algeria are really strong and think. Yeah, I fancy them to go quite a long way in this tournament. I really do. And Burkina Faso as well could be decent. I really love Kabore. I'm glad you mentioned him. You reminded me of him. Watched him quite a bit for Luton this season. And a very exciting player. I think that he might be it's his big shoes to fill, but he might be like the long-term successor to Kyle Walker, maybe. He's got the ability. Yeah, but the other two teams are really up against it in this group, aren't you? I do kind of feel a bit sorry for them. Angola and Mauritania. Yeah, it's going to be really difficult for them to get through, I think.
Oh, not to sound as the black sheep on Algeria, but if there's one reason why they might really disappoint again is that they've made it out of the group stage in only one of the last 4 tournaments that have been held outside North Africa. It's incredible. They have that doing. Having said that, they come into this competition with a defeat in 2023, but they did so also in the last in instances. I really want to see the guy from Roma that Jose Mourinho's got, Husam
Awar,
Yeah, he
long
would
time
have-
Arsenal transfer link.
It's
Yeah, I was going to say.
I'd love to see what he can do. He's had a few injury problems this season. If he can shake that off and come in and play well, it's a straightforward group. But like we rightfully said, Algeria have had straightforward group, coupled with the fact that North African teams just don't do well when tournaments are in West Africa and stuff like that. It might sound a bit fickle, but this is the AFCON. These are the stories that make the AFCON. You can't put science to it. It just happens for some reason, and they just have it quite really wrong, and one bad result leads to another one, and then it happens. But yeah, I just thought I'll throw that in. Everybody thinks Algeria is that good, but believe me, it's staggering to think that in the last 4 tournaments held outside North Africa, they've only made it out of the group once.
Honestly, that statistic doesn't scare me too much. But what you were saying just then about teams, especially, I'm going to go back to what you said earlier. Teams, I think, especially from the Maghreb. When I say the Maghreb, I mean Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. They're the ones that really struggle, in West Africa or in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think I don't think Egypt actually do that much, because there's a divide. And the divide is that a lot of the Egyptian national team is actually made up of players from Al-Ahli and Zamalek. And they're used to going to, playing their club football, all over the continent, South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, yeah. Whereas from the Maghreb, you have players like, and just to touch on what Rahman was saying, Husam Awar. Husam Awar is this twinkle-toed, very technical, skinny, very, very creative midfielder. And I swear I was talking to my doctor 2 days ago. I went in for a checkup. And we were talking about football. We are talking about Husam Awar, and he's like, yeah, he's a good player, but that's not a player for the African Cup of Nations. You can't take him to the Ivory Coast. Like, he told me he's gonna get malaria. I don't think he's gonna get malaria, but that's the thing. Husam Awar, like he his whole life he grew up in France. He's been playing on perfectly manicured pitches in Lyon. He's used to receiving the ball, not like the ball like dribbling, like on a bad pitch. He's not used to that humidity. And you're going to take a player like that for his first, outing to the Ivory Coast. How's he going to perform?
I always think you mentioned him before, Zaha. That was the reason that he never really took the African, playing for Ivory Coast. He always struggled. Yeah, it wasn't just the pitches and the whole everything that goes with it. If you're brought up in the Premier League academies and like you're used to all that, it's quite a big culture shock, isn't it, to go from that.
You should get used to street football. Get used to.
I talked to Zaha. I had the pleasure of interviewing him in 2017 after the AFCON, actually, in Gabon. That was his first AFCON. And they were in Oyem. Oyem is like in the far corner of Gabon, like near the equator. It's very tropical. And he was telling me about the bugs that he was seeing, like just how like different everything was, So like that can really make an impression on a player that, like you said, that that grew up in Europe, and for sure. So, and that's when I was talking about the Burkina Faso's midfield, Ibrahim Blati Toure and Gustavo Sangare, they're used to those terrains. They're used to, and a lot of it ends up being mental and psychological, and also like what you're used to. But like a lot of it is, can you deal with all of these challenges and these difficulties and overcome them? And that is not always a given for a lot of these players that are born and raised in Europe.
I think the group's a bit forgiving to Algeria from that aspect, in that had they been, and I mean, you could say the same thing about 2021, I guess, and you can see how that turned out. But hopefully, at least for Algeria, they have enough cushion where they can get out of the group and get some experience and get some acclimation to some of those conditions, such that when they get to the knockout stage, it's a bit easier for them. But it's definitely a concern. I think Rahman's got that angle nailed down in terms of North Africa versus the rest of the continent. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. Mauritania, Angola, we haven't really talked about too much. Joe, I keep coming back to you for some of the projected maybe third and fourth place teams in each group. Mauritania is a team, they're at their third consecutive AFCON. Anything you see from them that, or from Angola that gives you some encouragement? Because Burkina Faso, I think the panel clearly feels is probably above the other two teams in terms of qualification. But what about the other two, Mauritania and Angola here?
Yeah, I think everybody's right on with Burkina Faso. For Mauritania and Angola, I'm not sure either of these teams will really get one of those third place spots. I don't know. It's really hard to say. But for Mauritania, I think player to watch would be Aboubakary Koita, who's probably the best player for Mauritania at this point in time. He's playing in Belgium at St. Truden.
Was he leading scorer of the Jupiler League? He might have been leading scorer at one point, I think, of the Jupiler League. I think might have had 12 goals or something.
Yeah, he's definitely up there and definitely capable of scoring goals. Yeah, he's phenomenal. So they'll want to involve him as much as possible. For Angola, I think there's a lot of issues from top to bottom with this team. Like, to me, the defense feels a bit flaky. I'm not sure they have what it takes to break down the likes of Algeria or Burkina Faso. Like, I could easily see Mauritania and Angola drawing in their game. The midfield, I guess, is okay. The forward line's okay. Angola only won 2 games in 2023. They drew 7 and they lost 3. So they're kind of coming in with not the greatest record, I guess. Some of those were friendly matches, others were qualifiers and things like that. But yeah, I'm a little worried about Angola. They don't have Rui Modesto. There's no Va. There's no Ivan Cavallero, no Helder Costa. So they're kind of missing some of their bigger names. Rui Modesto, to me, is a shock omission. I don't know if it's because he's not in form because his season ended a couple months ago in Sweden, but he's been playing regularly for the Angola team, and I thought he might be a lock to make the squad. So that was a bit surprising to me. And I guess I'd say one player for Angola that you could watch out for is Zito Luvumbo, who's playing well at Cagliari. Younger player, but this could be a good stage for him, I think.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned, which also concerns me about Angola, you look back over the last 18 months, they've only defeated 3 teams. They've defeated Lesotho, the Central African Republic, and Botswana. That is it. Those are the only teams they've defeated over the last 18 months. So I'm definitely concerned about Angola. Going back to just real quick, something Maher said, when you look at Algeria, it's the opposite. In their last 17 matches, they've only lost once. So I think for Angola, it's going to be a tall task. For me, Mauritania is the team I'm looking at as potentially being a surprise team. Probably not to finish in the top 2. More likely, it's going to have to be as one of the best third place teams, but it would not surprise me at all to see this group only get 2 teams into the knockout round.
Even talking to people from Angola, their coach Pedro Gonçalves, I think, has been there since 2015, coaching first at the club levels, then under 17 and under 20. And he was responsible. They had a really great young generation of players in 2019. They won, I don't know if they won, but they went far into under 17 AFCON. I think they went to the World Cup as well. And that's where we had players like Joe was mentioning, Zito Luvumbo, Capita is a striker that is also very talented from that generation. Zini is another striker. Milson is another attacking midfielder. And so Pedro Gonçalves it's kind of like what Qatar did. Was it Felix Sanchez, the coach of Qatar at World Cup? They had good success at the youth level, and then he's just sort of continued with them onto the senior national team. Angola wanted to do the same thing, but that generation is not old enough. They're not complete. And what they've tried to do is sort of cherry pick older talent, players like you mentioned Lucas João or Helder Costa. They don't end up being selected. I think they refused call-ups. Another player, their best striker, Mbala and Zola, I believe, also refused a call-up this time around. So they're in a weird place where they're, again, like, it's 2 years too early. They're not really there yet, and the results, I don't think they're very optimistic in Angola either. And Mauritania, I think, because of the coach Amir Abdou, who used to coach at Comoros when they beat Rahman's boys 2 years ago. He's actually somebody that's, from what I hear, is like very, very good as a man manager and motivating his players, and he's a good tournament coach, is what I should say. And so Mauritania, I would agree, have a little bit slightly better of a chance, but like you guys mentioned, I think we could just see 2 teams proceed from this group.
Let's head down to Group E. Group E is Tunisia, Mali, South Africa, and Namibia. Another interesting group. We've got a few teams in here that have not been even present at the AFCON for quite some time. South Africa, it's been since 2019. Namibia was also there in 2019. But some teams that weren't there the last time. But I feel this group is maybe a bit open. Tunisia on paper, I think, looks great. Mali has improved substantially and really is a threat to qualify for their first World Cup at this point as well. Joe, I'll turn it over to you to start with. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with Tunisia or Mali? Because I think both of those teams we're going to spend a few minutes talking through.
I'll do Mali because I think Maher would be good for Tunisia. So for Mali, I think they're a little light up top in terms of the squad that they're taking to this AFCON. Like, they're really talented in the midfield and they're really talented in their back line. Like, I don't really have any concerns there. But up top, there's no Adama Traore. There's no Ibrahim Kone. He's injured. El Bilal Torres also injured. Moussa Dinepo is not there. So between like the 4 of those just alone, that's 111 caps and 29 goals. So I'm a little concerned about Mali's ability to bring in, you know, a striker and get those goals. Can they be provided from the midfield? Okay, yeah, probably. But yeah, that's I guess the thing that catches my attention the most. In terms of players to watch, I'll just mention, I think Nene Dorgeles at Salzburg is a really talented player. Boubacar Traore at Wolves, Kamori Doumbia at Reims. Those 3 are excellent players. So again, like, the Mali team has tons of talent, and how far can they go? I don't know, because again, to me, they're like a team that seems to stutter a little bit once they get into like the latter stages. So I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks, but that's kind of my take on Mali.
Yeah, I just want to give you one quick stat before we get the panel's opinion as well. So I think what you mentioned is very important in that the goal scorers are not there, and they do not they're not taking a player with them that has scored 10 goals for the national team. And that is very concerning for me heading into a tournament with this much quality and this many good teams, to see that it's kind of a where are the goals going to come from?
Yeah, it's a bit of a worry. I mean, Sekou Koita was really rated when he was young, as at Red Bull Salzburg, but not really kicked on. This is the problem, I think. I don't really think, mate, but it tends to happen with Mali. They really excel at the youth level, don't they? And then, for whatever reason, struggle to make. For whatever reason, they struggle to make the jump to the senior side. Although they've been progressing over the last few years and have always sort of just check the record. But I'm sure they've been in quarterfinals, semi-finals the last few. Yeah, so I know actually they haven't. Round of 16, the last 2, it's just felt like they should have done better than that, doesn't it? Like they've had the players to be doing a bit better, but for whatever reason, it's just not really happened for them so far. But I mean, obviously, Bissouma is going to be really important for them in the middle. I mean, he's been excellent for Spurs, really at the heart of the transformation under Postecoglou, and they're going to miss him a lot. But with somebody like that, he's one player who was promising. He was in their youth teams and did really well, and then lost his way a little bit, going to a new big club. But now he's really, he's really ready to probably shoulder the burden and maybe lead them to something a bit better, because the talent is there. It's just a matter of whether they can perform on the big stage.
I have this pitch in my inbox that's been sitting there for like 5 years. It's called Forever Young, why Mali only have youth success.
Yeah,
and
there you go.
Something that I've been wanting to explore for the longest period. Because at the under 17 and at the under 20 level, they'll go to World Cups, and finish in the top 4. They'll win them. And so the problem with their strikers this time around is they have actually 2 strikers that I think could have done a good job. Ibrahima Kone, who they call the Malian Lukaku. He's like also very built, and he's also bald, left-footed. He plays almost exactly like him with his back towards goal. He has, I think, 13 goals with the national team, or maybe 15. I'm not sure. But he's unfortunately picked up an injury. Yeah. And then El Bilal Toure, who made a 30 million euro move to Atalanta this year. I'm not sure if he's injured or his club is holding him back, but the Malian Federation don't seem to be very, very happy with Atalanta. There seems to be a little bit of controversy there. And as a result, you're right, they're not going with the target man. I agree that Yves Bissouma is the man to highlight, especially considering that Yves Bissouma is born in the Ivory Coast and he's actually Ivorian. He moved to Mali at a very young age, and as a result, sort of was convinced and was motivated to play for the Malian national team. And at times, actually, when his career sort of dipped with the Malian national team, or when he refused to come play for Mali for about a year and a half, a lot of supporters would say, "Oh yeah, he's Ivorian, he's not even Malian," and he kind of felt some way about that. So I think he's going to be hyper motivated to put in a good performance in Cote d'Ivoire. But yeah, they're so bloated in midfield, right? And it's all about how their coach Eric Sekouchel is going to be able to sort of manipulate that and make them into a balanced squad. Eric Schell is in the mold of this new blueprint of African coaching, where you have former internationals get their pro license badges and get their first real big job with their national teams. It started off with Aliou Cissé, then Jamal Belmadi from Algeria, Walid Regragui from Morocco, and now you could look at Guinea, Kaba Diawara. It really goes on and on and on.
He's also born in Ivory Coast, I think. Just to say,
Shelling,
he's also
with the coach.
Yeah. He was also born there. So
I didn't know that actually.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of links.
No, there's an intercenge. 100%. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on. That is really interesting though about the local coaches, isn't it? And we're going to talk about them later. But Walid Regragui, Morocco. My terrible pronunciation again there. Of the North African name. But yeah, that's a template. And Cisse.
100%. But I mean, the one consolation point for Mali is that the rest of the countries in their group, the rest of the strong countries in their group don't have strikers either. Tunisia have been lacking a number 9 for the better part of a decade now. And same thing with South Africa. South Africa, unfortunately, are out with Lyle Foster's out with mental health issues at Burnley, and Lebo Mutiba picked up an injury. So I think unfortunately, we're going to see like 8 or 9 0-0s in this group. It's going to be very, very boring to watch. It's just going to be a bunch of midfield battles. The best strikers actually play for Namibia, Peter Shalulile, who's been a top star on the African continent with Mamelodi Sundowns for the last 5 years. But other than that, everybody's lacking strikers. So it's just going to be a very boring midfield battle sort of group.
This group, interestingly, has probably about 30 players that are playing in the South African League. Between South Africa bringing a very, very domestic-based squad and a number of the Namibia players also playing in South Africa. So I think a lot of familiarity there. I agree. I think this is going to be low scoring. You're missing a lot of goal scorers from rosters, and Mali in particular. What are your thoughts about Tunisia, Maher? I'm curious because I'm taking a look at some of my numbers and where Tunisia rank, and I've got Tunisia as the second best team in Africa. Do you think that's aggressive? It feels like they haven't had enough success to be considered a second best team in Africa, but should I give my computer some grief?
No, you shouldn't give your computer some grief. I think it's a little bit inflated for one reason. Tunisia have become experts at qualifying for tournaments. They've qualified for the last 2 World Cups. They haven't missed an AFCON since 1992. So that's practically my whole life, pretty much. I was born in '91, so we call them the Germans of Africa because they're just so automatic in terms of qualifying for, especially the continental competition. I imagine that must compute in your formula quite heavily. The problem with Tunisia, in my opinion, is they're very much Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. At times in friendlies against Algeria and Egypt, they've looked like the better side and they've had great results. And then this summer, for example, they go to the Kirin Cup and they get absolutely smashed by Korea and Japan. I think they lost to Japan. One of the matches was 2-0, one of the matches was 4-0. And you're just like, okay, who are you? You know, are you the side that was really good against Algeria and Egypt, or are you the other side? And the problem is Tunisia, I think, don't know themselves. they really don't. It seems to be like a lack of consistency in the way they play and in their results. Their strength is in midfield. In Issa Al-Eidouni, who plays for Union Berlin, and Elias Khiri, who plays for Eintracht Frankfurt. Khiri is, for the longest period of time, has the player that ran the most, covered the most ground in the Bundesliga. When he was at FC Cologne, he was former captain as well, so he has a lot of great leadership qualities. They're a lot missing Hannibal Mejbri from Manchester United because he said that he needs to make a move this winter, and the 3 clubs that are very interested in him have asked him not to go to the AFCON. So he decided not to come. They do have a really great new winger, Elias Al-Ashuri, who plays for Copenhagen, who's like very technical, he's really, really good, and somebody I've been really impressed with, and all of Tunisians have been really impressed with since he's been playing for the Carthage Eagles. Youssef Msakni, like Andre Ayew, is going to be playing in his 8th AFCON, which is a record for Tunisia, I believe, and is also very, very impressive. So yeah, they're good in defense. They're good in midfield. They know how to be scrappy and get results, even in tournaments. They've never won an AFCON outside of Tunisia. They're all, for some reason, they managed to get to the quarterfinals and the semifinals, and then they have a horrible goalkeeping blunder. And I wonder about the collective psychology, I swear, of all their goalkeepers, even the goalkeepers now. It's something that somebody should do, like a psychological study or a sociological study. It's like, if you're the Tunisian goalkeeper, because it's been through different goalkeepers as well. Do you know, like, once you get to the quarterfinals or the semifinals, like, okay, all of my predecessors have made mistakes at this stage. I cannot make a mistake at this stage. And as a result, you end up making that mistake. I don't know. So there seems to be something that's lacking. They're lacking a striker, and they're lacking some kind of mental fortitude once they get to those knockout stages.
And I'm gonna, I know Rahman has departed, but I'm gonna go back to his theory a little bit. Tunisia finished 4th in Egypt in 2019. They won as host in 2004. They have not gotten past the quarterfinals outside of North Africa since the year 2000. So it has been a very long time, despite Tunisia's continued presence there. It seems, to your point, their ability to go even further, they haven't shown it. And I definitely am a little bit concerned about Tunisia there. But I also think it depends on how that knockout stage shapes up for them, because I think if they do come up against a team that's not a high scoring team, they can definitely grind it out.
Yeah, agree. I think once they have to take the impetus and the onus to take the game to the opponent is when they can struggle. I think if they understand that they need to sit back and soak up pressure and score on set pieces, and they're infamous for goalkeeper cramping and wasting 10, 15 minutes per match. If they manage to get into their dark arts, they can frustrate opponents and they can go far.
Yeah. Joe, I wanted to ask you a little bit about South Africa real quick, because they have not been at AFCON since 2019. They are a team that I think there's probably not a lot of expectation on them ahead of AFCON, but always a team that you think should be doing better than they are. And what is your sense on South Africa coming into this AFCON?
So I'm actually going to deflect a little bit to Ed and let him talk about South Africa first, and then come back to me.
Sure, yeah. They're a team that used to be very close to my heart because I used to live there for a bit for the World Cup and everything. So, but to be honest with you, I've lost. I still follow what's going on, but it's quite difficult to keep up with South Africa because, as you mentioned before, all the players play in the PSL pretty much, and I think that is actually to their detriment overall. Like, that's why they're struggling, because they should be. I mean, by bare minimum, they should be at every AFCON. They should not be failing to qualify for any AFCON, the resources and that they've got and the ability that they have in the country. But yeah, I think they just underperform because of the teams in continental competitions tend to do pretty well, like, Mamelodi Sundowns, but they're a, superstar team of lots of foreigners as well. So yeah, I think Foster is a big miss for them, though. I mean, we did one of our podcast episodes about him earlier this season. Very excited about him. I mean, it's just been such a lack of South African players in the Premier League for so long that it was really exciting to see him coming in and doing really well. He looks great, and it's a shame because he's actually playing now again for Burnley. So there's obviously some issue with going away or whatever it is, but we just wish him all the best and hope he's okay. But yeah, they're really going to miss him, and it looks a tough task for them to. Well, I mean, they'll fancy their chances of keeping it tight, but that's what they've been like since pretty much the last decade or so. I mean, they just keep it tight and try and nick. They did quite well in Egypt, didn't they? 2019, they got to the quarterfinals just by doing that, really, and nicking a goal here and there. But yeah, I don't think there's that much hope out there, put it that way, for South Africa. But Percy Tau's a very good player, and he knows African football really well, and I think he'll have a good chance to show what he can do. But yeah, I think they'll just be hoping that they can beat Namibia, because obviously that would be very embarrassing for them if they lose to their neighbours, who are not known for their football particularly.
I don't think that's a given.
No, exactly. No, Namibia will be tough. They'll be a good side. There'll be that game in particular is going to be a lot on it, as you mentioned. The PSL aspect to it is going to make it a bit of a derby.
So the thing for me about South Africa that is killing me right now, and it's not just for AFCON, but it's for the World Cup qualifiers and other games that they had this year too, is their squad selection. Like, it troubles me because you've got players like Fagri Lakay, who, as I understand it, is playing really well at Pyramids. Tashreeq Matthews, I watch him regularly in the Allsvenskan in Sweden, and he was their best player by far, and he was a really good player in the league as a whole. And like he's not even getting call-ups, right? Like, this is a player that came through the Dortmund Academy, has a little bit of pedigree, and like he's not even getting a look. But I think it's a player that could really serve South Africa well. And you've got others like Gif Links at our house in Denmark. Sia Negazana was who plays at, I guess, what used to be Stoia Bucharest, but they're not called that anymore. They're called FCSB. He was in the preliminary squad, but he didn't make the final squad, and so he's on pretty good form, and so I guess that confuses me a little bit in terms of the team that they brought here, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the fact that Bruce is looking for that core squad maybe that plays together in the league in South Africa. And so I think there's something to that, I guess, but he didn't bring any of them.
There's a bit of a distrust of players who go overseas in South Africa, and because they tend to go like to leagues like Sweden to start off with, and there's sometimes a bit like sometimes unknowns, and for some whatever reason they stick to what he knows, and
it drives me crazy. Like, the MLS guys didn't get in either, and that could be because their season has been over for a while, so it could just be a form thing. But like Blom and Longwane are not there. Motiba's not there, as we already talked about. Foster's not there. So yeah, I mean, Percy Tau is really gonna have to carry this team on his shoulders, I think. And I love South Africa, but I don't have a lot of faith in them for this tournament, and hopefully they prove me wrong. I think there's two players though in this group that would be ones to watch out for. Jaden Adams is a young player. He plays for Stellenbosch, in the South African League, and he's gotten a lot of praise. He seems to be a really good player. And then Yaya Sitole, who plays in the second division. Who plays in the second division in Portugal. Also a younger player who has a lot about him at the moment, and I don't think he'll be staying in that league for long.
All right. We'll wrap up with Group F. Morocco, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Zambia, and Tanzania in Group F. And Group F on paper to me looks like Morocco's to lose. It looks like I think pretty much a runaway for me. Morocco is a team, obviously, that went to the semifinals in the World Cup. The other three teams were not really in the mix at all to qualify for the World Cup. Just looking back at qualification for each team, Morocco qualified fairly easily. DR Congo was, I'd say, not all that impressive in a group with Mauritania, Gabon, and Sudan. They did win that group, but I would say not overly impressive. Zambia is interesting. Zambia did actually finish ahead of the Ivory Coast in qualifying. Ivory Coast was qualified as hosts already, but they did play those games, and Zambia actually finished ahead of them. So I think for me, and I think probably for the panel, we'd all agree that Morocco is clearly the best team in this group. I don't think winning the group is really going to be all that difficult for them. I want to spend a little more time talking about maybe the rest of the group and what we could see there. Particularly, I want to start with Zambia because Zambia is a team that, looking at them in World Cup qualifying, I was encouraged by their quality. They've got a very solid team. Joe, I know we've talked about Zambia quite a bit. Are you as optimistic, perhaps, as I am, given some of the talent on their squad?
I think Zambia could be a team that does get out of this group, whether it's second or third place. I have to, this is kind of a funny thing, but I have to point out some of the names on their team, which I love. I absolutely love. So you've got the likes of, you've got a Toaster, you've got a Gifts, you've got a Kings.
Toaster's number one, brilliant.
You've got Fashion. You've got Fashion Sakala, right? So like, that's just fun. Like, that's one of the things I love about Africa and just the, yeah, it just makes it fun. Anyways, in terms of the team itself, I do like the look of the squad, although I think it's really top heavy. Like, there's a lot of offensive firepower, so scoring goals is not going to be an issue for this team. I think the biggest issue is going to come in defense, and I'm not sure that that's going to be able to carry them very far. I don't know. I mean, I could be completely off base there, but I know for sure that, yeah, that they can score goals. That's not going to be an issue.
Yeah,
so
it's Abraham Grant's the manager, isn't he, of Zambia now? And yeah, he's got a bit of a mixed record in African football. But good. I mean, the biggest news, the biggest plus for them is Patson Daka, isn't it, coming back?
Yep.
He barely played all season, and now he's hit the ground running, doing really well for Leicester. And I think that he's going to be, well, a lot of their chances are going to rest on him, really, aren't they? And Fashion as well. Fashion Sakala, who's is he in Saudi Arabia now?
He is.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, one of my favorite AFCONs, probably my favorite AFCON ever, is when they won it in Gabon, 2012. And followed in the footsteps of the team that were killed in the plane crash. And yeah, there's just the spirit of the Zambians. You never know if they get going, then they're really they could be a great team. And Daka's on form, so he's got a point to prove as well. He probably would quite like to move on from Leicester, or unless they get promoted again, he's back in favour and stuff. But it's a good shot window for him as well to keep going with that form. And yeah, I think he could take them through that group.
One player for Zambia that I picked out. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but that I picked out is Edward Chilufya, and there might not be a lot of people who are too familiar with him. He actually just got a big move to Midtjylland in the summer. I think it was in the summer, and he struggled to get playing time there. He had left Sweden to go, and he ended up going back to Sweden for BK Häcken to finish out their season there. So he's kind of been up and down in terms of his club form, but he's a good player and probably a name that a lot of people aren't too familiar with. but he would be one to watch out for. Sorry, Maher, I interrupted you.
No, I think you guys are all spot on with Zambia. I watched them for a few matches during qualifiers. As you mentioned, they had great qualifiers, finishing either top or very close to the top alongside Cote d'Ivoire. They beat Cote d'Ivoire, I think, in one of the matches as well. But as you also mentioned, they're very top heavy. That front line of Patson Daka as a striker, and Daka is another player that I think plays better with his national team than he does with his club. He's really one of the top strikers in Africa when he plays with Zambia. On the left, you have Fashion Sakala, who had a great season at Rangers, is playing great in Saudi Arabia right now, and really provides another source of goals from the wing on the left wing. And you have Lamek Banda, who I think is at Lecce on the right wing. And those three combine fantastically for Zambia, and they're such a joy to watch. But at the same time, they're very naive defensively. Even though they have somebody like Stapila Sunzu, he was actually a member of that 2012 squad that Ed is talking about that won the AFCON.
He was a youngster, wasn't he, back then? And he's become like a fulcrum of the team. But yes,
a lot of Sun Tzu art of war puns were being typed back then. He's really great. He's a good center half. Lost a bit of pace, but he's still there. You have Cletus Shamba in midfield, so they have a good squad. Avram Grant has done a good job, but I do think they're going to be too naive to go far in this tournament. But the DRC, you mentioned, Brandon, that they had a mixed qualifying campaign, but that's because they started the qualifying campaign with one coach, and then they brought in Sebastian de Sabra, and under him I don't know if they've been undefeated. They might have lost very recently in the World Cup qualifying, but they went on a super hot streak. I don't know if you can fill us in, Brendan.
Yeah, they've been much improved. They did just lose to Sudan, which was a bit shocking.
Okay.
And lost to South Africa in September, but they've been performing much better. They had a streak for a while where they were just really, really struggling, and you weren't even sure if they were even going to qualify for AFCON. But I would agree. I think their performance has been dramatically improved over the last, 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, so under the Sabra, I think they've been much improved, and they do have a lot of experience. Players like Cedric Bakambu, who's been with Cote d'Ivoire for a while. Players like Chancellor Mbemba has been really good at Marseille over the last 2 years as a center defender. Theo Bongonda, who's been playing, I think, in Russia, he comes in on the left wing and has had 2 great performances with the DRC. An underrated midfielder, somebody like Samuel Mutesami, who I think has just recycled his position fantastically. He has a big afro; it's impossible to miss in midfield. So I do think they're going to be the second strongest side in this group. They could be pipped by Zambia. Tanzania under Adel Amrouche, I think, are probably going to be at the bottom here. Tanzania are a side galvanized by their domestic league with Simba and Yanga. A lot of their players are made up from the domestic league. The coach is, and I know him, and I've spoken to him, and he's Algerian, and I say this with as much pleasantness and kindness as I can. He's absolutely crazy. He's nuts, and everybody knows it. And that can be a good thing at times, because sometimes you need a really crazy, ambitious coach to do well. But at the same time, he can tend to overreach at times. And in Tanzania right now, from people that I speak to, they believe he's overreaching. I believe when they released their list with the CAF online list, he left out, for example, Mbwana Samata, who is the star player for Tanzania and has been a star player over the last decade. And then the federation panicked and they said, no, we can't do that. And then they sent another squad list to CAF, and now it's still unsure if he's going to make it or not, because he wasn't in the initial list to CAF. So basically, he wants to come in with like a bunch of unproven players. And again, that could be a recipe or a formula for success, or it could be a recipe or formula for catastrophe. And that kind of uncertainty is why I'm just not going to bet on them at all. I'm just going to leave them at the bottom of the group. But I do think Zambia and DRC is going to be an interesting battle for second.
Yeah, they've got some players from various levels of non-league football in England, really. I mean, there's a player from Boreham Wood. There's a player from Ilkeston Town. There's a player from, where is the other one? Basford Town, who play in the Northern Premier League. So it's going to be interesting. And yeah, I mean, that Samata story doesn't bode well, really, because he is I think he was when he played for Villa very briefly, he was the 100th different nationality. Well, he's the first Tanzanian, but he became the 100th different nationalities to score a Premier League goal. So people will remember him. I think he was pretty good. He's a good goal scorer. But yeah, like you say, stability is often the key going into these tournaments, and that you can't. trying new players, giving them their debuts in the tournament is possibly a recipe for disaster. Although you never know. I mean, they might be onto something. But
it's one of those things
yeah.
where they might not know what they don't know, right? They might just be
Yeah.
too young and too crazy where they could just impress. But I don't want to bet on them when there's that much chaos going on in the group. I don't want to.
It's a shame because it's a football mad country. I mean, not everywhere in Africa is as everywhere is, but I've been there before, and it was really mind blowing actually, just how much they love their football. So I'm sure they'll be really anticipating being in the tournament, and hopefully they can have something to celebrate.
I think a player that a lot of people are not going to be familiar with, but might be after this tournament, is Novatus Moroshi, who plays at Shakhtar Donetsk. He'll be the left back for this Tanzania team.
Joe, you've been impressive today. That I forgot about him, but he's really, really good. He's really good.
Yeah, he's awesome. He's very exciting, and the people, all Tanzanians that I've ever talked to or seen comments from or whatever, like they're crazy about him. Like they absolutely love him. So yeah, he's one to watch.
I was watching him recently, just nutmegging players, making runs down the wing. I was like, who is that? And I looked it up.
Yeah.
Novatus Moroshi. Okay, so yeah, he's very highly rated. Just 21 or 22, I think.
Yeah, he's very young. Yeah. For Congo, I'll just pipe in on that real quick. So I think you guys did a great job covering it. I don't really have anything to add. And I thought the comment about Theo Bongonda at Spartak Moscow, he's a player that I have on my watch list as well. But I think there's some players that they're missing. Jonathan Okito would be one of them at Zurich. He, for whatever reason, he doesn't seem to get called up very much. And it is surprising to me a little bit because he plays so well for his club. I think he could be a really good addition for this Congo team, but for whatever reason, he's not there. And then I would also say Maccabi Lelepo at my French is not good. It's Valenciennes, I think is how you say it. But anyways, he's
anyway, yeah. That'll do.
Yeah, he's a decent player as well, and he's not there. So
yeah, Lelepo was good in the Champions League, African Champions League with El Hilal, I think last year. So he moved to France this year. Elia Meshek is another, for those of you that follow the African Nations Championship, not the AFCON. He's a familiar name that can play on the wing. They did leave out Jackson Muleka, who plays his football in Turkey for one of the big three. They left out a few players that I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. But DRC do have a lot of talent. Even like a player like Simon Banza, I think playing at Braga. I want to say he's one of the top scorers in the Portuguese league as well. So they do have a lot of depth and quality. And it's always been about, like Nigeria, can they sort of weld all of this together into something more cohesive, something more coherent? At times they can, and they can make pretty deep runs. I think in 2015 they finished third. And at other times they can't, and they'll just be perennial disappointments then.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see two teams. I think both Congo DR and Zambia are going to qualify for the knockout stage out of this group. I think just looking and talking through some of the other groups, and I think the ability to perhaps take advantage of a weaker Tanzanian side and perhaps get a draw against each other. I think it's entirely possible we see both Zambia and Congo DR get out of the group to the knockout stage. It's probably going to be a tough path, though, not winning the group, and I think that's the presumption that we all have. Let's wrap up with Morocco and then just get into some predictions, because I think for many across the world and perhaps on our panel here, Morocco's the favorite of this tournament. And I think coming into the tournament, really off their successful World Cup campaign, people have been very, very high on Morocco. How far can they go? I think saying yes, they can win it. Sure. I think everyone believes that they can win the tournament. Is that likely? Joe, I guess I'll start with you. You've got the Morocco shirt on. You've been waiting patiently to talk about Morocco.
Oh, geez.
What are your thoughts on how deep Morocco can go in this tournament?
So a couple of months ago, I was pretty high on Morocco. You know, they just come off that really awesome run at the World Cup. But since the World Cup, I kind of feel like they've not gone downhill, but they're just not the same. Like So I don't actually think Morocco can win this. I think they'll definitely have a good chance of getting quarters, maybe semis, but um, I I haven't been overly like impressed with what I've seen from Morocco since the World
Yeah.
Cup. And I'll be really curious to hear what Maher thinks. I actually did listen to his episode on Morocco the other day, and so he might feel similar. But I do think a player to watch that many people won't know is Amir Richardson. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get, but he plays in France, and he's definitely a very talented player, fun to watch.
Yeah, and I just want to add before I'll turn it over to you, Maher, real quick. The last time Morocco won the Africa Cup of Nations was 1976. And since that, almost 50 years ago, there have been 10 different nations that have won the Africa Cup of Nations that are not Morocco. So it's been quite some time, and they've had arguably less success than many, many other African teams.
Yeah, I'm just going to be very brief. My main gripe about Morocco, it's not a gripe really, but it's them in possession versus out of possession. They've been really impressive over the last 18 months when they've been out of possession and sort of been needing to counterattack. But with possession of the ball, where they've been asked to really take the impetus and the onus to their opponents, not so much. And that's really the one thing I think we're going to have to watch there. But I trust the coach. He's a good coach. The squad is a great squad. And so in that sense, I do think that they are definitely one of the top four favorites in this tournament alongside Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Egypt. They're one of my favorites, but that's just my main thing with Morocco is I don't know what it's going to look like when they're forced to have possession of the ball and take it to a team that's playing a low block. And I don't know if they have a striker that's, as accurate and technical and with that sort of goal scoring instinct. I don't trust Yusuf Nassiri so much, who I think is much more of a complete striker. He can close down defenses. He can, initiate a press and everything. That's my main thing about Morocco. But other than that, I think, they're definitely one of the favorites of this tournament.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's just about whether they can get their form players back into that. They did so well it's a unit, isn't it? It's like a club team. I think that was a big part of their success at the World Cup. But again, Amrabat has been really, so integral to them in that tournament, and he's struggled in the Premier League. And I don't think it's because of, well, there's a number of reasons, but a lot of people have written him off as not a very good player and can't handle the Premier League. But I don't buy that. I think he's really, really top player, and I think this will be good for him to go away with Morocco, and I think they see it as their, well, maybe not their destiny, but it's a real motivating factor, I think, after the World Cup, just to not let that be a one-off and to become a sort of, a real generational team that's continues this forward. And yeah, I think they've got a great chance of doing that, actually, but again, the West Africa thing might be a big hurdle.
And last thing, what is the psychological effect of them knowing that they have the next AFCON at home? And the mood in Morocco is we have to win that one, absolutely. Yeah. But if all the concentration is on the next one, what is the psychological effect of them playing in this one? Do they know that, okay, this is a free go, so that we have to get it absolutely right next time? I mean, that could be something to ponder as well.
All right, let's get into predictions from the panel and wrap things up. So, great conversation, 6 very exciting groups. Ultimately, I'm going to ask everyone to pick their final and their projected champion. So, Ed, let me start with you. Who is your pick for the final?
Thanks a lot for that. Yeah.
Nobody ever wants to go first. It's okay.
I've convinced myself about so many. It's been great to talk through all the teams in such detail, and everyone's put forward some good cases. Oh, it's really difficult, isn't it? So, I think I'm going to go for. I can't go for the same final as last time. I'm going to go for Egypt, Nigeria. This time, I think Senegal. I was going to say Senegal, but I think I've actually convinced myself, and we've all that they're not struggle, but it might not be their time. I think Egypt, Nigeria are my 2 favorites, and I'd say that Nigeria are going to win.
Okay, I like it. Joe, let's go to you. I don't think Maher's made up his mind yet.
I'm going to go actually with I'm going to go with the same final as last time, actually. I'm going to go Senegal, Egypt. So I'm going to do the opposite of what Ed did. And but I am going to go opposite result, though. Even though history is against them, I think Egypt is going to win.
I'm going to make it a trifecta and also throw Egypt in there, but I'm going to throw them in against the Ivory Coast. I think it's about time that one of the hosts steps up and at least makes the final. I don't know who's going to win, but I think Egypt, Ivory Coast.
All right. I was going for the host as well. I actually think they're going to win. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Ivory Coast as host is going to win this tournament. I like what I've seen from them. I'm wearing the kit. It would be rude to pick against them. I think they defeat Senegal in the final. I'm still pretty high on Senegal, but I am certainly much more encouraged by Egypt, especially after all the points and commentary. I think they've got a lot of potential in this tournament. So I'm going to stick with Ivory Coast over Senegal, but I just love that this tournament is so wide open.
Yeah, it is really wide open. I was just having a look at the odds, and it's, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams. I think it is 7 teams who are between 6 and 10 to 1. Just it's a way of simplifying it. Gambling's not. I'm not promoting the gambling or anything like that. But just as that's how close it is, and it's brilliant. It's really cool. It's going to be such a good tournament.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Well, that concludes our AFCON preview show. Really want to thank our entire panel for going through each group and having some really engaging conversation. A lot to consider, a lot to look forward to, and really looking forward to this tournament. It's going to be a lot of fun in the Ivory Coast, and Maher, wish you well on your journey as well. And I want to thank all the listeners and looking forward to this tournament. So thanks again, everybody. We appreciate the time.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having us. It was really good fun.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, that was really, really great conversation.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
All right.